I hope most of you will be familiar with the ones in red here. We went through writing different kinds of scientific articles in lecture 1. We've covered a bit about what makes a good title and good abstract. We also went into what makes a good introduction in lecture 2 and followed by what a good methodology should have. And we're still going to revise that a bit after this based on your responses to the 3-to-1 form. And today we're going to touch about the result section of a manuscript, what makes a good result section, and finally go on to the discussion before ending off with the conclusion and references. So having all this information will allow you to construct a decent paper. At the end of this second half of this day, second part, there will be also a bonus lecture on publishing strategies. So I've given you a lot of writing strategies, how to go about writing a paper. But towards the end, I'm going to share with you some publishing strategies, some tips on how to get your paper published. It's actually most of the time getting your paper published in a journal really depends on a lot of factors, and I'm going to share with you 10 tips. So stay tuned to the second half of today's lecture. For the first half, we're going to cover CLO 5 and 6 here, results discussion, conclusion, and references, and also revisit some of your responses based on the 3-to-1 form. Thanks again to those who were sending your responses early. Nohana, Royet, Nolaritatna, Masud, Rika Lau, and Abaldio, perhaps. Thanks again for responding. I think this is today when I opened the 3-to-1 form, I think some of you may have added on your responses, but again, I was crafting the lecture this morning, so I apologize to those I missed out. I'm sure there are more responses by now. So remember last week I gave away pizza emojis to those who answered the questions. For those of you who are on this 7 of you here, you were the early birds. All of you each get a pizza emoji as well. And again, you collect 3 smileys. Sorry, not pizza emojis. You get 3 smileys and you will entitled to a free pizza delivery from me. And I think some of you here might already have a smiley from the last time. So just keep track, all right? Again, you need 3 smileys to claim a free pizza from me. I'll pay your bank account, order your pizza for your family. I'll contribute to that. So the early birds here got the worm. In this case, they got the smiley emoji. So thanks to all of you who responded early. All right, so moving on to question 1. I asked in the 3-to-1 form, how does one check for plagiarism and similarity scores for your manuscripts? So these are some of the answers. Have a look. Some of you gave great suggestions here. One of the more popular softwares to use is Turnitin. So why bother checking your plagiarism or similarity scores? Why should we do that? Because I just want to let you know, a lot of journals these days, they are using sophisticated platforms. I'm editor for this journal called Climate Change Ecology, for example. When I receive a publication brand new, they will tell me your similarity score. So if I see a score that's above 50 or above 30, I'd be worried. If I see a score maybe less than 10, I'm safe. I feel a bit confident that your manuscript has not been plagiarized. But again, Turnitin is one of the more popular softwares you can use. Again, you can specify the number of words that you want the software to take note of. I think all these parameters that you need to key in the plagiarism platform will then give you a score based on the settings you choose. So if, for example, if you choose too short a sentence, your score might be high. If you choose the software to look out for sentences which are maybe maximum 5 words, then you get a lower score. So right now there is softwares out there like this, but sometimes it's expensive. So you want to check out whether you're entitled to using Turnitin. Maybe your institution has subscribed to that. Maybe it hasn't. So you need to go and find out. Ultimately, these softwares are important. That if you're not sure whether you have paraphrased enough, because sometimes a lot of us are copying information from other journals and we're not paraphrasing enough, you may get a high similarity score, which you want to avoid. Because then if you submit it to a journal sees a high similarity score, then they might want to question you and check whether your paper is indeed highly plagiarized. So just be careful. People are watching these days, so you need to use this software. There's also a software called Grammarly. Apart from Grammarly, be able to check your grammar. Again, some of you here are not native English speakers. It's okay. I understand. If you are struggling with English, which is not your native language, you might want to use software like this to kind of make sure your grammar is all right. And again, if you're not sure whether your grammar is correct, you can always send it to a proofreader to check, but proofreader cannot check your plagiarism, but Grammarly also can. And so FYI, in case any of you might need proofreading in your manuscripts, you might email me later. I know people who will be able to provide a service like that. We can discuss, but again, I don't have a particular website to recommend, but again, if you're interested to make sure your manuscript is checked by a person in your field, in forestry, for example, you can also email me after this course and we'll discuss. All right, question 2. What are your biggest challenges writing an introduction? Well, someone said that, well, finding the best sentence to start has been a real issue. Like, how do you start? I think last week we mentioned, what the introduction format looks like. Start with a macro question, a macro overview before you zoom down. And indeed, you might want to follow this V sign as your guide. Writing a V-shaped introduction, what does that mean? Again, you start from something really general, which is top of the V, provide your background information, provide some global context or regional context before you zoom into what's happening about the up-to-date studies in the field, what are the pros and cons, for example, of other studies or current solution. And then you zoom into your specific problem and what are gaps, knowledge gaps, what are problems that you want to address. Why is your question really important? Why are you doing this? If you don't do this now, something will happen. You want to highlight the urgency of it. That's also one way to frame your problem. And finally, you zoom into your last paragraph. Remember, your last paragraph should be your objective paragraph. You have your aims there, or your research questions, not necessarily a hypothesis. You don't need a hypothesis all the time, depending on what kind of analysis you're doing. But most of the time, we have an objective in the last paragraph, and then that's how the V-shaped introduction section looks like. So again, if you're not sure how to start, really just go very broad, keep it very general. Give an example of a paper I wrote a long time ago. I was identifying where and how are roads endangering mammals in Southeast Asia's forests. So for me, roads were a problem back then. I wanted to find out which roads were causing problems for large mammals, especially endangered mammals across Southeast Asia. So you can see this is like a regional paper. So if you're working on a regional paper, you might want to start off with a very broad introduction. And you can just say stuff like this, like habitat loss and overhunting are two major drivers of biodiversity declines. You can put a full stop here. That'll be a nice topical sentence if you want to summarize what's going on in this paragraph. Or you can just elaborate further, okay, particularly for terrestrial mammals in tropical forests. So you're not working on temperate forests, you're working on tropical forests. This is where you want to focus, and then you can add some citations there if you want. So for those of you who are not familiar what these numbers mean, there are sometimes journals require a number citation rather than the actual author. So again, it all depends on the journal format. You might want to check the guidelines for authors, whether it has to be a number or as the author name. In general, this saves space, so some journals prefer putting a number citation. So again, this is really a broad sentence. I talked about what's happening across the world. You can talk about, since you are working on I was working in Southeast Asia, maybe I went up a bit, talk about East Asia as being the top there. And ultimately, the word planet here, you can talk about what's happening throughout the planet, the globe, the earth. That's where you start off. And then you zoom in to your particular topic, which was, in this case, I was concerned about roads. And so I did explain the current state of knowledge, what's happening in terms of road research. So remember, to present the state of knowledge, I talked about what is happening in America, Central Africa, and Australia. But in Southeast Asia, then I zoomed in on here. out of 533 road-related biodiversity studies, only one explicitly investigated impacts of roads. So this is where you introduce a problem here. It's a problem statement. There's so few studies quantifying impact of roads in Southeast Asia, and that's why this paper was quite novel. And then in Southeast Asia, then you start to elaborate what's happening. And so it's, again, this is how a good introduction might look. Another example from the paper I wrote on limestone karst of Southeast Asia. These limestone karst forests are really important. Hope some of you are really interested in limestone forests. Please contact me after this talk also. I want to chat with you as well. Another global statement was at the top here. About half the world's original forest cover has already been cleared for agriculture. Again, you start off the big macro approach and see here, this sentence here is really, really general, keeping vague. That can be your own sentence. This, most of the times, has to come from your own original thought. Reviewers like to see the first sentence being your own one, not copied from somewhere. If you have to copy from somewhere, please paraphrase it. But the first sentence of paragraph without a citation usually has to be something original. And then after that, you can start putting the citations for all the other sentences, right? So again, a very overview from the top. What's happening across the world, then limestone karst as the particular ecosystem I was focusing on, and then after that, zooming to the region. So I hope this answers this question from someone. Finding the best sentence to start. Yep, again, it's really challenging. I understand you. And again, it takes practice. And over time, you get the hang of it. All right, on to the second response. What's the biggest challenges for introduction? Someone said that probably the biggest challenge, yeah, again, copying and pasting the exact lines, but I'm glad this person is saying that discovered that organizing literature into a tabular form, finding out the methodology, the key findings, these are all very nice to be put into the table. And then from the table, you can then start crafting your introduction based on the table that summarize all the literature that you're working on. So in the last lecture, I gave a particular YouTube link to this YouTube video. It's called Literature Reviews. And this was something that's very a skill that's hard to cultivate, is summarizing a literature into a summary table like this. This example of a summary table. What's the author, the paper, what's the topic? Is there any conceptual model, theoretical model that there is? Then you just write it here. What kind of method you're using? Is it qualitative, quantitative? What's the context, sample size? What are the main findings? And then what are the limitation and gap? So if you keep reading papers and you kind of feel lost, one way to keep track is to start forming a table. Whenever you read a paper, once you're done, filling the blanks, and then file the paper away. Because sometimes we are tempted to read a paper, just chuck it aside, and say, remember, if you want to write a review paper, you need to put in the proper folder, have a folder labeled for this particular topic, put it in there, and then you can retrieve the folder again. But most of the times when we do write papers, we tend to use the highlighter, we highlight whatever that's important. But if you just leave the paper for just a few days, few weeks, you really forgot what this paper talked about, even though you wrote it down. So immediately after you highlighted your paper, you might want to consider putting all the information into a summary table like this. And that allows you to really organize all the information. And then from here, you can then pick relevant studies to form your introduction. All right, I hope that helps. Okay, so these are some other responses. What are some of the challenges? Have a read. So there's one person who said that comparing my work with others is the biggest challenge for me. Well, a lot of times you want to compare your study with others. This happens in the discussion. So later we'll see that. You usually don't compare. You start comparing research in the introduction. You usually do that in the discussion. So don't worry about it. So yeah, a lot of people are saying it's really hard to start, right? It's really tough to get going. And remember the last time I gave advice to you was to start with your results first, right? Don't start your introduction first in your manuscript. Go on, start your results, create those figures, create the tables, have a three to five nice figures and tables, and then start filling the information in results. Then you go on to your abstract. Abstract guides your entire manuscript, your roadmap, and then you go on to the introduction. So try this method if you always feel you're stuck at the introduction, because yeah, I mean, it's also not easy to keep your introduction concise and focused. Once you form an introduction, you might want to cut it down further. Again, this takes practice, and sometimes it takes another friend, another peer to help you with that, because most of the times we are lost in our own train of thought. Something might be think really short to us might actually be really long, so you need always to have a second perspective, a third perspective even. Knowing what information should be included in there. Again, now hopefully with all the guides I've given you, and you may have an idea. Limit in the reference to a topic. I'm guessing this person is asking how many references did you put for the particular topic. Again, there's no real rule of thumb for number of references you put it in. I mean, as long as you put the relevant citations in, nobody's gonna worry about there's too many references in your paper. Normally the word count takes care of that, because sometimes in journals, most of the time there's actually a word count there. So you want to make sure you're not exceeding that word count. So if word count is exceeded, then it might be you're having too many references, and that's where you want to cut down first. If you want to shorten the manuscript to fit a word count, the first place you look at is your references, and then start trimming it down, and hopefully you get the word count achieved. So yeah, still the main challenge is relevant topics that should be included, how not to keep it too lengthy. Again, for me, most of the times, introduction shouldn't be more than 2 or 3 pages. Anything beyond than 3 pages might be too lengthy. If you're writing a thesis, of course, that's a different story. But if you're writing a scientific manuscript, a scientific article, for me, 2 to 3 pages of introduction is good enough. Again, it depends on the topic you're working on. Of course, if you're writing a short communication or opinion, of course, the introduction to your piece is really, really short. If you're writing a review paper, introduction might be really long. So it really depends on the type of paper. I hope I've answered that. So somebody asked, what are the relevant papers to include? How do you look for the relevant citations and articles? I think one way is to use Google Scholar. I'm going to show you an example of how to use Google Scholar to find relevant articles. This is my profile. So for example, I'm going to scroll to this article here. And there's a link here. It's called related articles, right? Related articles, once you click that, you then can find all the relevant articles to limestone hills, for example. And these are the papers that you might want to cite. So again, instead of Googling blindly, use Google Scholar to your benefit. Try to find which of these papers are the relevant. There's so many out there to look from, and Google is doing all the job for you to find the relevant articles. So just don't forget, related articles here is something that you should look out for, finding in the relevant papers. Hope that answers your question. All right. The journey to getting a paper accepted is really, really long. So as I said, sometimes we are unsure of something is too long, too short, whether it's too complicated, too simple. It's very, very important to ask your good friends, or if you're not sure, someone in the experts in the field. They will make sure your paper is chopped and minced up until it's really concise. You get the relevant bits of information, throw out all the irrelevant parts, and then you have a nice paper to the end. And of course, it's not easy. You're going to get your feelings hurt. You're going to get bad comments potentially. Someone might not like your style of writing. But ultimately, all these people are going to help you to get your paper accepted. It's not a one-man show, one-woman show. Science cannot be done alone. Of course, sometimes you can have single author papers, but those are for really, really special people who feel that they don't need people's advice. But in general, we have to work together, and we are here as a team together with the colleagues here in this writing course. I hope all of you make some friends throughout this journey. It can be a very lonely journey, a very perilous journey, but ultimately they will help you decide on whether your paper is good enough based on your comments. All right, on to question 3. What are your biggest challenges when writing material and methods? These are some of the responses. Have a look. All right, so there's some questions here. Finding the right method with the relevant reference from past studies. Again, you need to, perhaps if you want to find suitable methods, check out the Google Scholar relevant articles there. You might find relevant methods for your work. Experimental design, some papers are quite complicated, quite hard to imagine, of course. Yep, definitely, maybe, but it's not your fault. Sometimes people didn't write the methods really, really well. So that's one of the issues. Something is you, sometimes it's the paper itself. Yep, so I think I gave a tip in the last lecture that if your research, your material methods for your research is too long, procedures are too arduous, too many steps, you might want to consider creating a supplementary information and then have people follow that. But again, keep the main points of the flow of your methods in there. Nitty-gritty details like the temperature of something which you used or the setting itself of a machine. You might just want to keep it into the supplementary information. If you're doing statistics and a lot of code you're generating using program R, you might want to put your code at the back of in the supplementary information or put it in your material method itself. Again, I don't think you should be too concerned about arithmetic equations when it comes to the plagiarism scores. I don't think your paper will be full of equations to the extent that you will get a high score. So if you do that, you also need to just, I guess, make a note when you submit your paper and mention this issue to the editor. Yep, that's always a challenge. Some of the methods might be so similar. They use similar words, and you end up getting a high similarity score. You might want to paraphrase that. Again, that takes time, takes skill to get good at it. Sometimes just changing the words around might be good enough. Just try your best and then see what the in says. Again, all this comes with practice. And if you're not sure, just put it in and let your friend look at it. Or even better, sometimes we want to get the perfect manuscript submitted, but actually your best friends are actually the peer reviewer in the entire process. They will be telling you, okay, this is not needed, this is needed. They're the ones that will be doing this job for you. So don't worry to get out a perfect piece of manuscript, because really, it's really so hard for manuscripts to be accepted as is. And most of the times, reviewers will come back with you with more comments. So use them to guide you whether you're doing enough for your paper. Right, the conceptual framework, yeah, can be tricky. It's definitely a challenge for a lot of us. It's nice to have a conceptual framework in material methods, the flow chart, but one thing you can do is really just make the use of nice flow charts available in PowerPoint, or you can just create some boxes, some arrows there, and they'll be good enough. As long as there's a story in your material methods and you're just providing a diagram to show how you are carrying out the experiment, is good enough. And sometimes conceptual frameworks these days, instead of just having boxes and arrows, you can also put interesting icons in there to make it more interesting. But it's not necessary to have a conceptual framework all the time, all right? So not every manuscript needs one, so don't worry about it. I found us a really, really interesting website on advanced tips of writing your material method section. Let's have a look. I'm in the PowerPoint. So yeah, like what some of you have said, what's a big challenge for a lot of you is providing the right amount of detail. So always recommend reading to try to make sure it's a bit too general, not too specific, but the specific stuff has to be in the supplementary information. Yep, so that's one tactic. So again, you provide a lot of detail in your methods, but most of the times when I read a material method, I just want to understand the approach, not really the step-by-step process on how you do it. That can be the supplementary information. I just want to know whether you have chosen the methods correctly, or if the new method that I want to learn. That's why the material methods should show. It shouldn't really have all the detailed steps, but in the entire manuscript, the detailed steps can be put the supplementary information. So like here, as I said, this person said, yep. So use the storytelling structure. Again, it's everything you do when you give a presentation, it's all about telling a story, including writing material methods. So sometimes instead of saying this, you need to let people know why you did it. So this is one of the objectives here, right? To compare the elemental composition of samples, we perform this study. So again, look at the word here, third person. We use we take ownership of your results. Use I, me, you, we, whatever. That's really, really important. Structure the material method section in the same way as the result section. So again, whatever you put in material method should be like a scaffold template for your result section, so it's easier for the readers to follow. So all your subsections in material method should follow what's happening in your results as well. It's a great tip here. Organize your supporting material and refer to it. Yep, that's what I mentioned just now. If too bulky, too much information in material methods, try to organize it and just make reference to it at the end. And finally, don't self-plagiarize. Yep, instead of just copying and pasting directly, you need to make sure you paraphrase and try to move things around. Even though sometimes it can be really tough, like for example, you're writing chemical names, it's always going to be the same chemical name, but the way you write it, the way you tell a story, it's really important that you don't copy and paste someone else's methods just like that. And I said last week, you can just say, refer to this person's material methods for this experiment. That's also one way, instead of copying that wholesale. So please don't do that. All right, back to our PowerPoint. All right, so these were some of the burning questions you had from the last lecture. There are a few here that we want to just go through. How do you identify the gaps of the paper? Again, gaps of your manuscript. I'm thinking this person, or referring to the gaps of the paper you're reading. I think sometimes you can find limitations of paper placed at the end of the discussion. You can look for the gaps there, but identifying gaps in your own research, and that's something you should be doing actually. And yeah, I think that's what this person's meaning. Try to look out for the limitations towards the end of the paper. Sometimes they have it there. The caveats or limitations should be there. To what extent our discussion should be, I think we're going to answer that later. How to make your introduction more concise, relevant to your paper. Remember the V idea, the V-shaped introduction. That's how it should be. You don't have a too long introduction, more than 2 or 3 pages. Don't have that. Keep it to 3 max. How to display a simple data into an interesting description? Well, it's again, take skill and practice and a lot of reading to see what others have done. It really depends on the kind of paper you're talking about. So the research recommendations, conclusion or discussion? A good question. It can be both, but I'd rather most of it can be in the conclusion, but sometimes the discussion, you might, if it's too many research recommendations, you might want to have its own paragraph in the discussion. But if you just have 1 or 2 recommendations, it's okay to put it in the conclusion. But generally, I'll show you what good conclusion is about later. How important are team discussions when writing a paper? Well, I'm assuming you mean discussion among your co-authors. Well, if it's that, then yeah, it's really important that you, from time to time, discuss the outline of the paper, who contributes what, to make sure the paper is successful. That's, for me, really important. How often you do it depends on your timelines, but it's good practice to always maybe meet up once every 1 or 2 weeks just to make sure the paper is on track. How can references or sources in the paper, how old can they be? Really, there is no limit, but generally you want to cite as many papers within the last 5 years as a rule of thumb. Old paper, you can cite old references if it's citing a theory or a concept that someone created, that's fine. A law, for example, you might want to cite ancient scientists, rather historical scientists, for those facts and the theories and laws that have been around for many, many years. That's fine, but generally your references has carry the most up-to-date ones as possible, because that shows that your research is current. How do you represent the results in a graphically catchy way? Well, there's a lot of software out there. Program R can do that. You might want to also be creative, open a PowerPoint, put a dial figure there, and then start arranging or getting icons from the internet. There's a lot of free icons that you can place it there, insert it there, and make it into a nice graph or figure. Or you might want just to have a figure or pictures. So a PowerPoint example could also be a very useful way of arranging your figures. And then you just save the slide as a JPEG, and that's how you get a graph. If you write this result discussion separately in the result section, should we only give the result? Traditionally, yes, that's the main practice. In your results, only report the results, don't discuss the results. Discussion should be separate, but some journals, they combine the results and discussion. So if that's the case, you're allowed to discuss the results. So it really depends on the journal. Writing a thesis with a complete paper in each chapter, do we need to write another chapter on the review? Good question. Most of the time, yes, you do. If you're doing a thesis, but also it depends on your supervisor. It depends on your examination committee. But generally, I would think most theses I've seen have a literature review section before they go into each chapter. All right, so that's all from the 3-to-1 form. Any questions? Nope, if not, we're gonna just go through with 3 last misconceptions. Remember the first lecture, I talked about several misconceptions about scientific writing. For example, do you need the address? You need to be attached to the organization to publish. I think a lot of you say, nope, can just get a PO box or give your house address, it's fine. But here are some other misconceptions that I want you to have a look at. All right, statement 1. I want you to type in the chat group, true or false. You can only publish discoveries of truly scientific significance, something that's earth-shattering. You can only publish that. Everything else, forget about it. What do you think, true or false? Yeah, sometimes we want to publish the most fantastic discovery. Something might be too small to you. You think that's not worth publishing. You actually don't think like that. I like to always say there is a journal for every paper. Every study out there has its home in one journal. So don't worry, you can publish something of significance, but it doesn't have to be really, really world class or attention grabbing. Aim for that, but you don't really need all the time to publish discoveries that are of scientific significance. So this is an example of a paper that's probably not significant, but again, it was something interesting. For example, the first record of a cloud leopard feeding on a binturong, just a camera track image of one animal eating on something else, first time ever. Here you go, short communications, can get it published. This is the binturong, caught in the mouth of the cloud leopard. So yeah, that was cool. First time, there was no ever record of such a thing happening before. All right, second statement. To enter a Q1 journal, you have to pay the journal to publish your paper. True or false? Right, some say true, most of you say false, some are not sure. Yep, a lot of journals, especially, they want to be open access, they want you to pay. All right, so The answer is really false, all right? You don't always have to pay a journal to publish a paper. I'll give you some examples. If you don't already use this website, you should. This is a website called Skimago. So this one-stop portal will tell you about where or what's the ranking of all the journals, whether it's a Q1, Q2 journal, whether it's inside, what's the rank of the journal. And I think all of you are in forestry, right? For forestry, let's type forestry. So these are all different forestry journals that you might want to consider. It's just a snapshot. There's so many forestry journals. Wow, fantastic. 57 forestry journals. So you got no excuse not to publish. It's going to be a journal for you. They're not ranked in any particular order here, but let's check out this journal, Agroforestry Systems. What's happening here? How to publish in this journal. There's always information here. This is scope of the journal, and it also tells you the whether is it a Q1 or Q2. So when you say Q1, Q stands for quarterly. Sorry, the quartile. Sorry, not quarterly, quartile. So if you're in the first quartile of journals, the top 25% of this field, it'll be a Q1 journal. That's why it's green in color. You can put your mouse cursor here. If it's second quartile, it's Q2, and Q3 and Q4. There are 4 quartiles all in total. Most universities now want their academics to publish in either Q1 or Q2 journal, because that means you are publishing in the top 25% of those journals in this field. So for the field of forestry, this journal has been a Q1 for the last 4 years, but in 2016 it went down to Q2. So it fluctuates sometimes depending on the number of articles and the citations of a journal. So you might want to always use this website Skimago to check how your journal is doing. And there's all these various metrics here that you can check. But ultimately, how to publish in this journal, there's information here. So again, if you want to submit a manuscript, everything, most good decent journals will have their submission portal online. So you need to go and create a login and then type in your username, password, and then go in there. And all the tutorials are here as well, so don't worry about it. So the home page here of the journal, if you're interested. So the fees are always here, open access fees and funding. So you can see here that a lot of article journals want to publish your paper online. There's article processing charges for that. So it can be really exorbitant. But sometimes you scroll up further, there's actually a traditional publishing model. And these are restricted access. That means organizations with access to this journal can read it because they are paid for subscription. So you can publish in a traditional model, which you do not have to pay a fee. So this journal is clearly Q1, and there are 2 options for you. If you want to do this traditional route, you don't have to pay. If you want to also make sure your publication is out there in the world, people can just download it anywhere, open access, and you have to pay APC using cost money. So again, this is a good website to scour for potential forestry journals. Remember, this website is called skimagojr.com. All right. Let's see. So we've dispelled this myth, false. You don't have to enter Q1 journal. You don't have to pay all the time. There is such a way. And also, sorry, I wanted to add with you. There are some journals out there who are not Q1 yet, but potentially could be Q1. They're actually giving a lot of free. They're waiving the article charges. So, for example, this is a journal that I'm editor at. It's called Climate Change Ecology. The Elsevier Journal. So you see here, article publishing charge free, right? Why is this free? Anybody can hazard a guess? You can type a chat group here. Thanks, Dr. Lau. Yep, in your personal view, do you think we should pay for the free access? Well, it's very debatable, and some people feel they shouldn't. Some journals want to make money, are doing that. And of course, how do you make things open access? Of course, the journals have to pay people, editors, sometimes the admin staff to make sure everything runs smoothly. So they have to charge a fee because they have to pay overheads to staff doing it. So sometimes I feel it's expected, or I have no issues for journals charging because they do have to pay the administrative staff to keep the journal ticking. Of course, sometimes it's a bit too much, and that's where it's up to you if you want to pay. But anybody had an idea why this journal that I'm an editor of is free? Not because I told them to make it free. High number of downloads, I'm not quite. Yeah, usually open access journals, they would want to charge. So actually, this is an open access journal. It's not charging. What do you have an idea? Nope. All right, so let's go back to the. All right, because the author has paid for it. Nope. Sometimes a journal has a society that sponsors it. For example, there's a journal called Perspectives in Ecology and Conservation. So again, you might want to consider publishing here. So this particular journal has been sponsored by a society. That's why they do not charge fees. Okay. So why is this particular one waiving its APC? If one day Climate Change Ecology finds a sponsor, it's going to be not there at all. But same Elsevier Journal, there's nothing here. So one reason is because Climate Change Ecology, we type in here, go to home, Climate Change Ecology. No results are found. Wow. So I'm actually editor of a journal that's not really found here. So that's a problem. So one reason is because, as I mentioned, this is a very new journal. This journal is only about less than a year old. Climate Change Ecology came out and it's not indexed yet. Doesn't have an index to citation. Sorry, it's not listed there. It doesn't qualify to be a Q1 or Q2 journal yet. That's why it's really new. That's why they're waiving it. So you might want to, it's kind of like taking a risk. If you want to publish a paper here, there's no Q1, Q2, it's not indexed yet, but in 2 or 3 years time, when it gets its accreditation, it might be a Q1 journal, and then wow, your journal's already, your paper's actually in a Q1 journal, or maybe a Q2 journal, or maybe a 3 or 4, you don't know, it's the risk you have to take. But the journal has no right to charge you yet because it's not indexed. So even though it's an Elsevier journal, it sounds like a very good journal, but it's still not on Schemago because it's a new journal. They want to attract as many submissions as possible. That's why they're waiving the fees. So that's one way to get published. If you're not concerned about whether you want to publish in a Q1, Q2 journal, you might want to look for this kind of journals that have waive the article publishing charge. All right. All right. Okay, third misconception, it's good to publish all your results all at once in the same journal. True or false? Once you've written up something, you got so many results, let's just cram everything into one paper and submit it in the same journal. False, false, all right. Okay, unanimously, a lot of you say false. That's correct. Yeah, you don't have to publish all results in one journal. Sometimes we want to get 2 or 3 papers out. Again, remember the first lecture, I think I mentioned, choose 3 or 4, 3 to 5 results. If you have 10 or 15 results, just to choose 3 or 5, publish it, and then the rest of it you can separate it into other journals. If you publish all your 10 or 15 results at one go, you're going to end up with a very long paper, which then might not even get accepted. So it's not good to publish all your results in the same journal. Sometimes you have too many results. But if you think you got 3 to 5 good results, you want to showcase that, just fit everything into one single paper. That's fine. Your thesis, for example, some of us may have written a thesis by chapter. So each chapter can be broken down into a different paper. For example, my thesis, I've managed to break down the thesis chapter by chapter. I managed to publish it. And if you're interested to check out what my thesis looks like, you can have a look here. So yeah, for example, sometimes in your thesis, there's a lit review, general introduction. In this case, that can be one paper. In chapter 2 just now was the paper I talked about where roads are endangering mammals in Southeast Asia. That itself, this was actually my lit review in chapter 2 where I published it. And then chapter 3, for example, was published separately. Number 4 was published. Number 5 was never published. This is one of my sins of my PhD. I did not publish my chapter 5. So very sad about it. Things just got caught on with life and not being able to have time. So please don't repeat my mistake. And one of my most important chapters was not published here. Hopefully one day, but that's what I'm saying for the last 10 years. So anyway, yep. So this is a example of a lot of results here. Try to publish it in different journals. All right. So we're going to move on. It's going to be 3 o'clock here. I'm going to, let's see, there's time for a break. It's 2:55 here. It's going to take a 5-minute break, and then we'll come back at 3 o'clock. All right, before we go on to the rest of the lecture. So see you in a bit. So see you at 3 o'clock. Hi, everyone, welcome back. All right, so by the next half of the hour, we're going to cover three things. We're going to talk about what makes a good results and discussion section. Number two, we're going to finish off how we're going to write a good conclusion, what to look for in references. And finally, I'm going to share with you 10 publishing strategies. This is something I'm going to share with you my experience on how to get your paper published. So hopefully you stick around. All right, so let's go into what a good results and discussion section would be. I had Abdullah, you had a question, please go ahead.
Thank you, Ruben. Um, uh, you say that from your thesis, there is a good chapter. You don't actually publish the paper for that chapter. So, is there any, that means what I say, that time limit or any other thing, that is how many days before, or sorry, how many days after you publish? Is there any timeline or any strict line? That means I do a work now, and if I publish that paper after 10 years, so is that actually hamper the quality or any other things? This is number one. Another thing is that when I publish that paper after 10 years, in the time, so the reference, you say that 5 years is better, the recent reference use. So in that time, how what types of reference I could use actually? Now I just do the job. So when after 10 years, whenever I publish the paper, so the reference would be old, at least 10 years. So actually, how could I manage such things? Thank you.
Oh, very good question, Abdullah. Yeah, I mean, to be honest, there's no real hard and fast rule that beyond a certain time you cannot publish. There's no such thing. Again, it's all based on your field, also based on what's changed in a particular project site where you're working on. Maybe the topic has evolved a lot. So it really depends on what your topic is, what your research question is. And maybe, let's say, for example, if I was working in one particular forest area, the results from that are still applicable today, then if you're confident that nothing much has changed in terms of the implications of the results, or nothing has changed in the landscape that will affect your results, then try to go ahead and publish it. I mean, why not? Of course, it's always good to publish your research as soon as possible. In my case, I was trying to be ambitious. I was trying to redo the analysis in another statistical framework, and then I got someone else to do it. The person kind of sat on it for a while, and the analysis wasn't done. So by then, I guess life caught up with me, and I managed to publish it. That's really sad, invest so much of work in that, but I think it's still possible to publish it. To be honest, in my case, I don't know about your particular case. I mean, we can always discuss that later offline. Again, there's no hard and fast rule that you need to stick to, but of course, the sooner the better, so that your research is relevant, and people are looking out for research in the last 5 years. If your research was done 10 years ago, it might not be cited, right? It doesn't mean it cannot be published. It just means that and someone might not cite it. But I believe if it's a good research, good piece of work, and the results were interesting at the time, someone can say, well, 10 years ago, Abdullah did this, even though he just published it recently. But things have changed, and this is what the results are now. People will might still cite your paper. I mean, if given your results that you published today are still relevant and not changed. So I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you.
All right. Any more questions? If not, then we'll move on to results and discussion. All right, so what should your results be? And as I mentioned, alluded to just now, your results should really kind of match the flow of the material and methods. And if you use the same subheadings for your material methods, use it the same for your results. But in general, the first few sentences of your results should actually contain a summary sentences, 1 or 2 sentences that summarize the results. And then you talk about the main findings. So I'll show you an example later. So results should have this summary sentence and then your main results with your graphs and tables. Always give the most important result first, although you may have your, I guess, objectives in sequence. You might want to restructure it later. Let's say you worked on objective 1, 2, 3, and during your study you found objective 3 get the most interesting results. You just kind of go back and shift your objectives around. So objective 3 becomes objective 1. And then in your material methods, you talk about this most important result. And always just leave, for results, there's no such thing as save the best for last. Try to mention the most important things first, all right? Highlight that first, because people want to see that. So again, subheadings are so important, so use those, and as much as possible, try to align subheadings as much as possible with the material method one, so it's got a nice flow, so people can match. Okay, this is what your methods were, these are your results, and easier for people to read. So for example here, these are some results that were placed into subheadings, and these subheadings kind of match the material methods. And yeah, so in these subheadings were also kind of similar to the objectives. Like for example, objective 1 in this paper was to build a site-specific plant reference database. And this is kind of your summary sentence. For all 90 specimens that are collected, the phylogenetic tree recovered the monophyly of several plant genera. So that's one summary sentence there. And for this particular objective, objective 2 was to understand the diet of the flying fox using next generation sequencing. I can say here with our newly designed primer, we were able to successfully amplify. So this was your first sentence that summarizes what happened, you give the good news, and then you elaborate what the good news was. So clear, very clear, right? You do not if you have a separate discussion section, never discuss the results here. Just present the results as is, and then discussion you can just slowly discuss bit by bit. Never try to put citations or in your results section. Results section should usually be free from citations, which referring to other papers. If you want to compare other studies with your results, that happens only in the discussion. All right, so it's very, very simple. There's nothing to it for results, really nothing much to say. But I just want you to think a bit for a moment, think for 3 minutes, and just tell me what your biggest challenges to writing the results section. Just type it out there, and maybe we can discuss that over the Zoom chat. Just gonna give you a 3-2-1 form because this is probably the last lecture I'm giving for this kind of work. So just type in a 3-2-1. Type in a Zoom chat so that we can discuss. So please let me know what your biggest challenges, any questions you might have for results. Give you 3 minutes. All right, thank you very much. Very interesting questions. And the more questions I see here, I think this calls for another workshop, but a lot of you have questions on your results, which requires analysis and how to present them. And to be honest, that requires a separate workshop that's not going to be covered in this lecture, because what I use is a software called Program R, which then you require code, and that allows you to generate a lot of beautiful graphs and images, but that takes time. And yep, catchy graphs. Yep. All right, let's start from the top here. Okay, Prakash, thanks for your question. Challenge is to make the result short and informative. Yeah, that's a valid challenge for a lot of us. Okay, do we put how much information do we put in the results? Again, sometimes also there's a temptation to discuss it. So some of the questions here actually refer to the discussion part of the results. So really, your results shouldn't be too long. You should really, once you have your 3 graphs or tables, kind of tell people what these graphs and tables mean. In simple layman terms, if you have statistical analysis, put the values there, the p-value or the probability, report all those, and then discuss that in the discussion. And I think ultimately people just want to see figures and tables that are really illustrate what your analysis of your data was, and that requires a separate this workshop, to be honest, because it'll take a lot of time. But don't worry, you'll get practice if there's going to be another writing course after this. Thanks, Prakash. Yes, what's Hazwani, how to summarize the result? Yeah, I mean, just one of the first 2 sentences of your results can usually summarize like how many samples you collected or how many places you went. These are the kinds of summary sentences I'm talking about. For example, after 20 surveys of this Kenya Forest Reserve, after conducting 30 surveys, we have documented 34 mammal species in this forest. And the rarest of the animals was the Malayan tiger. So these are example of a broad sentence, and then later you present a table of all the species you managed to get in the forest. And then you discuss the trends, for example. This is what I'm trying to say. Your first sentence has to be something very general. And again, your results really just follow the number of figures and tables you have. Try to, again, aim for 3 to 5 good figures and tables before you discuss it. Sequence of the discussion, Miley is asking what should be the start, the middle, and the last portion. We'll talk about the discussion after this. But for material methods, again, you have to follow your objectives, right? Your objectives, and probably, let's say, 3 objectives, 1, 2, and 3. You should have the subheadings for each, as now demonstrated, and then you present that. There's no real order, but as I said just now, present your most important result first. Thanks, Lau, for saying, yep, challenge has been performing analysis. That's, as I said, something we should discuss. Another workshop, how to do that. Statistics is not easy, and I've been doing it for many years, but again, that requires another training session. But don't worry, it can be done. Basic, simple analysis, if I were to recommend something, would be to use pivot tables or charts in Excel sheets. Once you create your database, try to use the pivot table to kind of tease out important trends. If you're not sure how to do it, there are a lot of YouTube tutorials on how to construct a pivot table or chart, right? So check them out. Yep, it's always a challenge to accommodate all the findings without elaborating, but you need to elaborate to some degree and then discuss it in the discussion. Present the information nicely. Yeah, it's really not, it's not easy. If you were to use Excel graphs, for example, right? Excel graphs are so kind of amateurish these days, to be honest. If you're trying to publish in a good journal, it's not good to use Excel. All right. Just want to show you for a bit. So a very common program we use called Program R. If you're not familiar, this is a free statistical software that we use to not just do analysis, but to create graphs. So Program R can create all these wonderful looking, colorful graphs that usually SPSS cannot do or Excel cannot do. But if you're interested in nicer graphs, there are new softwares, on-rank graphs. There are all these different free graph makers you can use as apart from Excel, because Excel gives you the usual boring graphs and figures. You can check all these graphs here using Canvas Graph Maker, for example. You can do flowcharts here as well. This is all something different, right? Using softwares like Canva. For example, you can create a bar chart here. You can just key in your values and then create nicer looking graphs like this. Now, these are probably more for presentations, right? So again, R is probably the best program software to use. And there's a package called ggplot2. This is one of the features of R that will allow you to create beautiful graphs. So ggplot2 in R gives you fantastic graphs like this. And it's very simple. The code is here. All you need to do is change the code according to your data. And like I said, this requires another session. Look at all these wonderful graphs. Scatter plot. So again, sometimes the fate of your paper lies in the hands of a good graph. Your graph is not professional like this. You put a simple Excel graph, that's going to be tough to get published. All right. So hopefully you'll check all these out. How to use R, how to learn R is all on YouTube as well. You can learn it from scratch. No worries. Okay, Royet said the biggest challenge for me is when my findings never conform to the findings from literature, or did they conform to the research hypothesis? Yeah, I mean, sometimes maybe it's a question of not your sample size is too small, you're not getting the effects that you want to see that match your hypothesis. It's always possible. But sometimes there's nothing wrong if you get a weird looking result. It might be novel. If you think it's worth publishing, go ahead. If not, maybe you need to tweak your study design. That might be the issue. You might not have carried out the right sampling approach or the right experiment to kind of see your test, to see the results that match your hypothesis. And if you're not sure how to find literature that agrees your results, again, try checking Google Scholar and look for related articles. You might find it there. Has been asking how to present analysis in relation to the literature. Not sure what this means. Hazwani, the result mostly involves electrophorograms, so how to display that it looks clear. Yeah, so sometimes when you get a reading from an instrument, it might not be very good, so you need to do your own graphs. And I said, Program R allows you to do all these fantastic kind of looking graphs that might be useful. Here, got a box plot here, different bar graphs. So you need to really take the raw data from instrument and then redo the graphs in software like this. So yeah, Abdullah, this is the software, Program R, to give you catchy presentation graphs. Yep, happy to arrange a training for Program R. I give training to undergrads in Sunway University, year 1. I also give training to postgraduate students. We can discuss that later. Rasila, potential variables, data not important, over interpretation. Yeah, I mean, that's also a big issue sometimes. Might be interpreting too much into your work. Let the peer reviewer sort it out. If you're not sure, talk to your peers. Yep. And if you didn't collect the right variables, there's always an issue. You need to go back to the drawing board and recheck your study design and see, recollect the information again. Of course, it's always important to start off by identifying the right variables first. All right, thanks all for sharing. Moving on, hopefully you get some idea of what a good methods section looks like. All right, what about discussion? What should a good discussion look like? Really, your discussion should be all about discussing whether your results have answered your research questions, your objectives, and if not, why. If it has, then you look for articles that have supported your findings. And again, how to do that? You can trawl through Google Scholar, look for relevant articles. And if you can't find the PDF of the article, you can always go to ResearchGate, have an account at ResearchGate or academia.edu. And sometimes the papers, articles might be there. And if you have access to journal databases like Web of Science or Scopus, then allow you to download the full paper to check. But in the discussion section, really, yeah, it has the paragraphs have to follow. If you have 3 objectives, minimum, you need 3 paragraphs or more. So again, you need to discuss it with the results from other papers, discussing your results in relation to your research question, and then try to find supporting evidence for or against it. It's okay to find articles that are against it, and then you can give your own interpretation after that. But always in the first paragraph, you should try to start off with a summary of your main findings, like your results as well. You need to have a nice, interesting summary statement, 1 or 2 statements that emphasize the novelty of it. For example, here in the discussion, you don't straight away start off your discussion with the result number 1. You need to actually have an introductory paragraph here that highlights the novelty of the study. For example, our study is the first to describe the diet of the island flying fox, which was previously unknown. That should be kind of your first sentence. And then you highlight the novelty of your study. To our knowledge, it's very important to use this word, to our knowledge here, right? If you're not sure, this kind of protects you. This is your qualifier. Instead of saying, this is the first use of NGS to identify, you're not sure, always put this phrase here, to our knowledge or to my knowledge. And then you're safe. So you identify the plant taxa and put it. And you kind of summarize the results here shortly. We found that fixed from the highest amount of plant taxa in the droppings. And this strongly suggests that fixed composed the core diet of flying foxes on the island. So this is a nice summary paragraph for your discussion, and then you go on to discuss each objective, whether you met them or not. So as I said, it's very important to compare your findings that found similar results or dissimilar results. That's fine. It's very important to highlight these and then explain why it's the case, why you got a different result than others. You give your own hypotheses. And then finally, some paragraph is really important in discussion. People always forget this. They should have a paragraph stating the limitations of your study or your caveats, because if you don't have this paragraph in your discussion, it's easier for reviewers to shoot it down. People might think this person is coming up with a perfect perfect study, and there's no flaws. And in fact, we always need to acknowledge our flaws in life as well as in publications. You need to state your limitations. Example here of a caveat paragraph in this manuscript. So you can talk about all the issues. For example, your issues with the weather. There was not enough samples done. Make your excuses here, kind of here, so that reviewers won't use any of this to shoot down your paper. Once you cover all the bases, cover all the potential limitations, reviewers have a less of a chance to shoot your paper down. But if you don't have this section here, if you kind of project your paper to be the perfect one, no flaws, you're then setting yourself up for potential rejection. Just bear that in mind. All right, so again, it's a very short discussion on the discussion itself. I just want you to, again, write down what are your biggest challenges when it comes to writing the discussion. Take 3 minutes and type it out in the Zoom chat. So it's question Mr. Jata. I think the result section is not about pros and cons, it's about actually reporting what you have found, right? Pros and cons and all that. It's kind of like what you put in a discussion. You just report what exactly you found in your results. And then these are the findings. And then you discuss in the discussion whether or not it went your way or not, what are the pros and cons, if there are any, that should be in the discussion. You want to cite other citations that comes in the discussion as well. All right, Mylene, yep, similar challenges just now mentioned. So again, try to use Google Scholar. Google Scholar might show you relevant studies to cite, as I showed you just now. All right, so not many challenges. Okay, here they come. All right, thanks a lot. Okay, so one of the first questions was, it's difficult to know the extent of the discussion, how long it should be. As I mentioned just now, maybe good guidance would be really looking at how many objectives you have in your original introduction, and then have that mirrored in your discussion. You have 3 objectives. You should have generally at least 3 paragraphs. The first paragraph should be a summary of your findings, your novelty. The first paragraph should be the one, second paragraph should be the one just addressing the first objective, and so on. And then finally, you end it off with a statement on your caveats and conclusion to talk about your future directions as well. That's one way to do it. Again, discussion shouldn't be too long also. Really depends on the kind of research you have. But that's just a good practice to not do such a long discussion, because if it's too lengthy, you might be discussing and waffling a lot. And again, if you're not sure, pass it to the peer reviewer to sort it out for you. These peer reviewers will have a lot of experience to let you know which paragraphs are unnecessary and which are. So don't worry, just send it in. Okay. Yeah, so another challenge was making a comparison and contrast to the findings. That's been a challenge. Challenge to understand when we report results and discussions in original research, we need to focus for the findings of other authors in comparison to other outputs. Okay. I see what you mean. Yeah. So when you have your results, discuss it, tell the world whether you think it's a good result or a bad result, or it makes sense, and then contrast it to another study elsewhere that supports it or gives an alternate view. It gives an alternate view, then you might give a reason why there's an alternate view. If it's a similar view, then of course you're kind of happy in some ways, again, depending on your research question. Yeah, I think a lot of you are concerned that you are getting unexpected results, and I don't know, for me, sometimes it's not necessarily a bad thing, but you might be worried that it might not meet your objectives. And if that's the case, you might want to go back to your research question and see whether you asked it correctly. I'll give an example of a manuscript just to take you through it again. So this is a paper that my master student wrote on estimating the population density of leopards in a rainforest in Malaysia. This is my master student, Laurie Hedges. It's published some time ago. So what we did was we managed to identify leopards based on the camera trap image. We kind of changed the camera trap settings to set off an infrared flash, and as the result, in the daytime, our cameras were able to identify leopards. So just an example of a map where we did our study and the discussion. So remember, I refresh your memories. We started off with a summary sentence of how important your study was. That's the first few sentences. And then you can also give your own perceptions that you say, hey, this method is kind of accurate. And when you start talking about your different aspects of your objectives, here it's like our study provided the first density estimate for leopards, the world's first population density for melanistic phenotype. And then giving any examples of what has been done elsewhere. Say, oh well, for example, in Java, there was a study like done on that. Look at it, there's an old citation here because there's an old study done. That's fine. And you can say that, well, all these studies have been using one method, but here I am using another technique. Their methods were shown to be unreliable. Then you start discussing like that and just make your point. My cameras were able to identify individuals, and again, the whole point is to show what's been done elsewhere and then come back to the point of saying, well, I believe in my results are good. That could be your ending sentence of your discussion point. And in this case, you were using one method to estimate the population density, so you can even discuss the method. The method you use could be a discussion point as well. And then finally, once you're done, because my paper only had one objective, so there was only one paragraph on that. But as I said, next paragraph was talking about the methods, and then finally mention the limitations, right? The caveats. And that's done. You're done with your discussion. Not terribly long. And your last conclusion, again, it could be further directions or research. It could be implications of your results. And it could be a conclusion, but conclusion doesn't always have to be Here, it can be in the form of another subheading, a synonym in this case. Yeah, that's my conclusion here, was my management implications. Yep, so I mean, it's tough to go through a lot of examples with you online here, but just to give you an idea of how we should do this, hopefully you can follow these steps. But again, thanks for sharing the challenges that you've talked about just now. Any more? All right. Apologies if I did not answer your question correctly. Yeah, I think most of you had generally had the same concerns. So again, it's okay to have different results as long as you can discuss it and find studies that support it. You're fine. If you can't find studies that support it, it's also okay. Just mention there. To my knowledge, no other studies have found this. It's also worth reporting. All right, so on to the second part, how to write a conclusion and reference. What a conclusion will look like really is to again re-emphasize, right? You've emphasized the novelty in the discussion, the first paragraph, but in your conclusion, you need to re-emphasize the importance of it as well. And then here you can announce further research recommendations. And it's very important to use strategic repetition, use different words to mean the same thing. So a lot of times these words just kind of provide the reader that you're supposed to look out for these terms. In the main message should be there in the intro, the main message should be there in the results, discussion, and conclusion. I'll show you what it means in a bit. All right, so what's the conclusion? The first statement really kind of summarizes what your study was, the good points about the study, what's the novelty. That can be also put in the conclusion. Again, it's just about changing the words a bit. Don't use the same words they used in the first paragraph of the discussion. Try to change it out a bit. Again, this takes skill and practice. So you can announce the further research here. Furthermore, rigorous sampling is required to understand dietary patterns. Don't use the same words of more research is needed to do this. More investigations are needed. Try to be more specific. So in this case, we are trying to tell the reader that we need sampling done at the level of the individual animal here. Right? Don't give a vague general recommendation. There's always going to be more research is needed. Reviewers are tired of that. So try not to say that. Try to be more specific is what you mean. Yeah, so this example of a conclusion, a very short paragraph just to drive home the main point. Again, use the same similar words again, like this. The first to use NGS, next-generation sequencing, this was mentioned in the results section as well as the first paragraph of the discussion, but I can mention it again in conclusion just to let people know that your paper is so special, so important. It's okay to repeat the words, but don't repeat too much. Everything in moderation as always. All right, so references, what should good references be? I've only got 3 things to say to you. Please standardize, standardize, standardize. Every reference should have the same kind of format following the general instructions. Your job here is your test, is to really make sure your manuscript follows the general instructions. If you can't follow simple instructions, that can sometimes be the general test of whether you can do that. And if you don't follow instructions, they might sometimes refuse to send your paper on to peer review. So it's very, very important to standardize your references and follow one particular format. How can you do that? Very simple. You can again use the free software like Mendeley EndNotes to keep standardizing the format, or you can use, if you want to manually type it in, you can just use Google Scholar button. Right. So if you're using Chrome, please go and install the Google Scholar button, and I'll show you how to use it in a bit. All right. So if you want to For example, have this paper here. This is my supervisor's paper in Nature. If you're lazy to type out all these 200 author names into your journal format, this Google Scholar button here, once you install it, appears at the top right hand corner. All right, click this Google Scholar button, click the word cite here, and all these different formats, whether it's APA, Chicago, Harvard, will appear here. So all you need to do is copy this and then put it into your references, and then everything will be the same. So Google will give you a few standard formats that's used throughout, but most importantly, you need to go and find out the journal, what it requires. Does it require the APA format? Does it require the Harvard format, a Vancouver format? Clearly you can see the differences, right? For the Vancouver, for example, there's no dots, or to abbreviate the names, it's just WF instead of W.F. Terms, there's no brackets for the years, for example. So if you're confused about all this, please use the Google Scholar button to standardize. All you do is copy and paste, right? So if you're not sure, let's see, forestry. Impacts of deforestation. So the Google Scholar button only works for journal articles. For example, if you put a news article here, like Manga Bay, you click this, it might come up as well. It gives you the APA format. You just click this again, that might come up. But most of the times, like in other websites like this, for example, when you click this, nothing happens. All right. So usually this APA, sorry, this Google Scholar button works for articles that have been cited in Google Scholar. So that's one way to standardize your formats. All right. So please explore that. So last question, what are your biggest challenges to writing conclusions and references? Please type in the Zoom chat again. All right, thank you very much. Okay, so let's see. I think most of you have also the challenge of writing a concise conclusion or concise discussion, concise results, concise introduction. Everything comes with practice. And if you're not sure, let your friends have a look. If not, just submit it for peer review. Your peer reviewers will help cut it down. But essentially, the conclusion really, as someone mentioned here, is covering your main finding of your paper. Again, highlighting your main finding, what kind of methods that we use to do it, and then what the implications of your conclusion, your findings. Talk about implications, and if you have 1 or 2 sentences on the further research that you can propose, and then just end it there. So conclusion really doesn't need to be longer than 1 paragraph. Usually 1 or 2 paragraphs is important. I would keep it to 1 paragraph, really, like half a page or less than that. Don't write an overly long conclusion. Your conclusion shouldn't be like your abstract, where you mention what the issue was, the problem at the start, what you're doing, how you're doing it. It shouldn't be too detailed like your abstract. A conclusion should really summarize your main findings that you want to tell people, highlight the novelty of it if it's novel, and talk a bit about how your research will can be expanded in the future by others. That's one thing to do that. All right, so what else here? So in the references, some of you were worried about which format to choose, all the references to be followed. Again, every single journal has its own different set of instructions. So just follow it. There's no one universal guide of how to order references and what format to use. You need to go and download the journal instructions, find the instructions, then choose the appropriate format. I've shown you how to get one example of a format from the Google Scholar button if you don't know already. And again, you can alter your settings in EndNotes or Mendeley to follow the journal formatting. So Sujata's asking, author should be full or last name. Yeah, really depends on the journal. A lot of you have questions about what kind of format to use. Please just look at the journal format instructions. It's all there. It'll tell you what to do. But if you've chosen one particular format, stick to that, all right? Do not change, standardize it according to just one single format. The question was how to make a connection between opening and closing statements. Not sure what's the opening statement here, but really just let people know the novelty of your research at the conclusion, and then talk about why it's important, and expand on, give suggestions on how that can be expanded upon. Usually your last line of a journal also can be really catchy. Think about it. How we can make it a catchy, punchy. This also takes practice. References, recovering the reference, especially when link should be included. I'm not sure what this means. Sorry, I mean, a lot of you have, I guess, very important questions, but I'm having difficulty trying to understand exactly what you mean. I think this requires this benefits of a face-to-face workshop where you tell me, show me what's the issues, then I can let you know. So sometimes, I think maybe what Asmin is saying, that journal software will put the link there, and sometimes the references may not be there. Yeah, I'm not really sure. So just again, try to use the Google Scholar button. That's one way to help you standardize your formatting, copy and paste, and then edit it accordingly if needed. All right. Okay, thank you all for sharing. So on to the last part. We got 10 more minutes. I'm gonna quickly breeze through 10 publishing strategies. All right, advice number 1, to publish, you shouldn't be a perfectionist. If you think you're not sure whether your journal article is too long, too short, not concise enough, let your friend or peer have a read. Don't just keep working on it for years and years until you fail to publish it. That's one of the mistakes, because you want it to be a perfect manuscript. Please use the peer review process. It's there to actually improve it and guide you. Even if your paper gets rejected from the journal, I'm sure reviewers will give you a lot of comments to improve it, and that's how you improve. You will get rejected, send it again. If you get rejected, send it again. Eventually, believe me, it will get published. All right, so don't try to be a perfectionist when it comes to research. My friend here published his paper in a journal called Remote Sensing. I told him many times, please finish it. Pass it on to us to read, but he kept sitting on it, and eventually it took 8 years to publish this paper. 8 years old, this data is 8 years old, but luckily for him, it got published, but to be honest, it was a bit outdated by the time it came out, so just be careful. Number 2, don't be a soloist. Try not to publish alone. Try to work in a team of scientists or your friends. It's a Nature paper we published by my supervisor. Again, all of us in the team had different skill sets. For example, I was working on the GIS. We had asked people working on the agriculture aspects of the paper, the economics of the paper. Someone was just good at the statistics on that. Someone else was good at shaping up the paper. All of us bring different skill sets to the paper, and ultimately we have to work as a team in science, and you cannot do it alone. So don't be a soloist. Number 3, publishing advice is really need to choose your journal wisely. Just now I gave you the website Schemago. That's a great place to check out for journals. Just type in a keyword there, like forestry. All those journals came out, but some of these journals are really bad. Okay, you want to avoid them, and they are called predatory publishers, predatory journals. This is called the Bill's list. Please Google this. If you're not sure whether your paper or publisher that's legit or it's predatory, it's the list of in Bill's list. There's also Ulrich's list of good journals, but I prefer to use the Bill's list. Go in Google, key your journal in there and see if it's bad, because a lot of times, a lot of open access journals out there, they just want your money. They want you to pay, they invite you to submit your article to a special issue, but actually they're just exploiting you for your money. So just be careful not to spoil your reputation. Again, this is one of my repetitive advices. Send it to your friends. Once you finish a paper, don't be a perfectionist, leave it for a week. Edit it again, and then send it to your friends. Don't edit again, leave it for a week, edit again, leave it for a week. At this rate, you never get published. So rule of thumb is, once you're done, set it aside, because your mind has been too focused onto the paper. You need to give your brain a break. Come back to it after a week, edit it again. Otherwise, your paper will be sitting on the computer forever. So send it to your friends. It's a very critical part to get your advice. And among your friends, find tough critics. If you're not sure about your paper, if it's good or not, send it to a tough critic like me, for example. Email me your paper, have a look at it before submitting. I'll give you good advice, or if I can't help you, I'll point you in the right direction. But you need all these people. You don't want to have good comments. You want always people to give you the good feelings. You really need to really get how you call it, thick skin when it comes to criticism. If you're not, you can't face criticism, it's going to be tough for your paper to make it past the line. All right. So, advice number 6, as I mentioned just now, follow the formatting of the journal closely. Check out the information for authors. It tells you what correct format to use with the APA, Vancouver. Follow that closely, standardize it. And before you submit a journal, sometimes they ask you to write a cover letter, right? So how to write a cover letter, that's also another skill set to be learned sometime. These days, these online submissions may not require a cover letter, but it's always good practice to have one. It's a good practice. Summarize the main findings of your paper to the editor, and then they can help get it past the initial screening. Once the editor sees you make an effort to write a cover letter, it's more easier to get it across the finishing line and get into the peer review process, and then we'll see from there. Advice number 7, once you get the paper back from revision, please work on it. A lot of times, when you get your manuscript back from the reviewer, you are really sad. You get bad comments, you can cry, and you get very angry. This is Malay called jangan tension, don't get too stressed from the comments. You have to be polite when you respond to the reviewers. Also, say thank you for your comments. I agree with you. This is how we can improve it. Or if you disagree, you can say thank you for your comments. I respectfully disagree. This is what we think. You don't always have to agree with the reviewer, but you can be polite. You cannot be very rude, right? Once you give rude comments back, consider your paper rejected. The reviewer might not like it. And again, it's okay to be rejected, right? I've nearly got a 20% success rate sometimes when it comes to grants, publications, slightly higher, but not very high. Most of the time, for 90% of submissions, the problem is not the novelty, it's the explanation of novelty. How you communicate your findings is the issue. It's not the quality of your paper, it's how you communicate it. And that's why we're here today in this course, to improve the way you write. But again, the reviewer comments are there to help you improve, and then there's always going to be a journal out there. Believe me, resubmit it. Don't be sad. Okay. Advice number 8. As I said just now, your response letter when you get your paper back can be very critical. Be professional and don't, we say in Malay here, jangan terasa, don't be too sensitive. You need to be professional. And when you write back to the editor, you can explain what are the improvements you've made to the manuscript exactly, and say you've covered all the points, and then believe me, the reviewers will have a easier time of accepting your paper. Advice number 9. If you're interested to go on to academia or pursue your career in academia, it's always important to build your CV, to publish as many okay papers as possible. A few big papers, we can. Don't always aim for nature, science. Try to aim for decent impact papers. Try not to have too many Q3, Q4 papers. Have a good mix. It's okay to publish in Q3, Q4, but not too many, all right? Try to aim for Q1, Q2. Again, the 5 types of papers I mentioned just now, earlier in lecture 1, there are review papers, and there's also data papers. Have a mix of all, right? Don't always just publish review papers. If you're only publishing review papers, it's not going to get anywhere. You need to always try to have a good mix in your CV. It can be short comms, data papers, responses, popular articles. Believe me, that's going to be useful for your CV. And a lot of times when your paper makes it to the peer review stage, reviewers or editors will Google Scholar your name. If your name is not on Google Scholar, you don't have Google Scholar profile, that might be detrimental towards you. If you don't have enough of these different kinds of papers, it's also will work against you. So try, once you have enough papers, have a Google Scholar profile, and then have a presence on the web. At the very least, have a website of your own research. That will help reviewers kind of see that this person is interested, really trying to publish and is credible. The main thing is to have credibility, and that's how website presence can help. Advice number 10, last one. Be generous offering quartership. If you're not sure whether you want to give a quartership to a person or a friend, you think this person has done enough to earn it, well, you might think again. Sometimes everybody, it's about the spirit of giving, the spirit of reciprocity. Be the first to give. People feel obligated to give it back to you. So if you are very generous offering quartership, that will help you with your career. This article, this friend of mine, my supervisor, I'll show you just now in the Nature paper just now. So my supervisor gave authorships to 200 over people in a Nature article. All these people contributed data to this particular paper. And how does he get his citations increased? Because all these people eventually, they want to include him as a co-author in their own papers. So that's how you multiply your papers. Again, you have to be ethical when you do this. You shouldn't be giving all co-authorships unethically if you didn't do anything. So please take note.